So we discussed the Democratic convention that happened in Nevada over the weekend, and I explained to you guys how ass backwards it was. 58 Bernie delegates were simply excluded from the process over paperwork and registration issues. And Democratic officials literally rigged some rules when they did a voice vote, a yay or nay voice vote, and it was super obvious. In fact, there's video of that part. So Bernie supporters were rightly really angry about that. And as a result, there was some screaming in the room, for example. Well, the mainstream media decided to weigh in on this, and here's how they covered it. They ignored the corrupt process and the snubbing of the 58 Bernie delegates, and they spent their time condemning Bernie Sanders because they say his supporters are violent. They're so violent. Are you kidding me? So what evidence is there of that? None. There's no evidence of that at all. And let me go ahead and read you here Bernie Sanders' statement in response to the allegations against him and his campaign after the Nevada convention. He says, "It is imperative that the Democratic leadership, both nationally and in the states, understand that the political world is changing and that millions of Americans are outraged at establishment politics and establishment economics. The people of this country want a government which represents all of us, not just the 1% super PACs and wealthy campaign contributors. The Democratic Party has a choice. It can open its doors and welcome into the party people who are prepared to fight for real economic and social change, or the party can choose to maintain its status quo structure. Within the last few days, there have been a number of criticisms made against my campaign organization. Party leaders in Nevada, for example, claim the Sanders campaign has a penchant for violence. That is nonsense. Our campaign has held giant rallies all across this country, including in high crime areas, and there have been zero reports of violence. Our campaign, of course, believes in nonviolent change, and it goes without saying that I condemn any and all forms of violence, including the personal harassment of individuals. But when we speak of violence, I should add here that months ago, during the Nevada campaign, shots were fired into my campaign office in Nevada. An apartment housing complex my campaign staff lived in was broken into and ransacked. If the Democratic Party is to be successful in November, it is imperative that all state parties treat our campaign supporters with fairness and the respect that they have earned. I'm happy to say that has been the case at state conventions in Maine, Alaska, Colorado, and Hawaii, where good discussions were held and democratic decisions were reached. Unfortunately, that was not the case at the Nevada convention. At that convention, the Democratic leadership used its power to prevent a fair and transparent process from taking place. So, Bernie goes on to be very specific, and he lays out the exact issues that occurred there, which are the same issues that I brought up to you earlier in this segment and when we originally covered it on Monday. And, you know, we said the 58 delegates were snubbed over paperwork. We said, hey, the voice vote, it was clear it went the other way, but the party rigged it and said, no, it went that way. So he brings up all those specific issues. And how did the Democratic establishment decide to respond to such an obviously balanced and accurate statement from Bernie Sanders? They responded with outrage. Outrage over what? What are you mad at? Well, let's see here. So from Vice News, we get this, quote, Nevada's Democratic Party is accusing Bernie Sanders' staff and supporters of inciting violence. Excuse you? Inciting violence. What the fuck are you talking about? All right, more. Harry Reid weighed in on this in his infinite selloutedness. Quote, I'm surprised at the statement. I thought he was going to do something different. Bernie should say something and not have some silly statement. This is a test of leadership. Oh, indeed, it's a test of leadership, Harry, but not for Bernie Sanders, for you. And you failed miserably. All right, more. Debbie Wasserman Schultz. The senator's response was anything but acceptable. It certainly did not condemn his supporters for acting violently or engaging in intimidation tactics, and instead added more fuel to the fire. All right, let me pause there because I want to go ahead and bring up exactly what Bernie Sanders said again, so you get the idea of just how untrue that is. He said, our campaign, of course, believes in nonviolent change, and it goes without saying, I condemn any and all forms of violence, including the personal harassment of individuals. So he did condemn it in no uncertain terms. He just also brought up the fact that the convention was shitty and rigged and corrupt. Well, Debbie Wasserman Schultz doesn't like that. She loves corruption. Don't believe me? Go read what she did with predatory lenders and how she took their side over the American people. But I digress from that because Debbie's not done yet. She's got more finger waving to do with Bernie Sanders. So she says, it certainly did not condemn his supporters for acting violently or engaging in intimidation tactics, and instead added fuel to the fire. It is never okay for violence and intimidation to be the response to that frustration. That's what happens with the Trump campaign. We can never resort to the tactics that they engage in. Wow. So now Bernie supporters are like Trump supporters, and Bernie doesn't condemn the violence even though he literally condemned the violence. Again, the thing that you're upset about is that he went on to shine a light on the disastrous convention that happened and how it was rigged against Bernie's delegates. Remember, these are facts. This is not conspiracy. 58 Bernie delegates were axed, and they were axed because, I don't know, paperwork, registration, something. Oh, would you look at that? That ended up swinging the result to be for Hillary Clinton and not for Bernie Sanders. How shameful are you? These people are absurd. So look at the dirty trick that they did here. And by the way, this is a Republican trick that Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Democratic establishment did. They changed the conversation. So the real conversation is about the convention and how fucked up it was and how rigged it was and how it swung the result and how 58 Bernie delegates were axed over paperwork. And they did the old switcheroo and they said, well, no, let's not talk about the convention. Let's talk about the response to the convention. And oh my God, are you saying you're okay with violence? I guess you're okay with violence. The fuck are you talking about? This is the same thing. So Fox News, instead of talking about the Iraq War during the height of the Iraq War, they would talk about the people who talk about the Iraq War. They would talk about the response to the Iraq War. So they'd say, oh my God, you had a Democratic congressman who said that George W. Bush doesn't care that much about the troops because we're still over in Iraq. How unpatriotic is this guy? How anti-American is this guy? Wait. Why did you change the conversation? The conversation was about the war and how bad it is and the lack of evidence for it and the fact that we did an offensive war and all the civilians that are being killed, so on and so forth. They don't want to have that conversation, so you deflect and you change the conversation and you talk about something else. Oh, sure, you're anti-American. Look at what you said about the war. Forget about what he said. Let's talk about the actual war. Let's talk about the actual convention. They can't talk about the convention, so you got to talk about the people talking about the convention. And guess what? People are rightly angry. So they rigged the convention, and then they turn around when you get angry and go, why are you yelling? Why are you yelling? You're hurting my feelings. You're being so offensive. Why are you so angry? Calm down. This is unbelievable, man. And let me just, in closing, let me say this. Their only evidence of, oh my God, violent Bernie supporters, have there been any arrests? No, there haven't. So what are they talking about? Well, people were yelling when the convention was rigged. Somebody called the woman who gavelled out, the head of the Nevada Democratic Party, they called her a bitch. Ooh, scandal! They're like, see, they support violence. And there's also one voicemail that is a death threat against one of the people in the Nevada Democratic Party. Now, that is totally unverified. They just play this audio and go, Bernie supporters. Paul Begala on CNN literally used that to smear all Bernie supporters. He's like, well, see, Bernie supporters, they're on the side of death threats. Again, what are you talking about? It's totally unverified. And why would Bernie be responsible for that anyway? That's my question. So link it to Bernie, blame Bernie Sanders for this. They want him to come out and apologize for it. Well, hold on. In the news the other day, Wendell Pierce attacked a Bernie supporter. Did I come out here and say, Hillary Clinton, look at what's happening. Your supporters are violent. Why don't you come out and condemn the violence? I guess you agree with the violence. Wendell Pierce hit somebody, and look, you're just sitting there and you're not saying anything. I guess you agree with the violence. Hillary Clinton supports violence, everybody. Why don't you condemn it? Why haven't you said anything? What kind of a ridiculous, hacky argument is that? And again, let me reiterate, it is unverified. So they had this voicemail, and they're like, oh, see, a Bernie supporter doing a death threat. Now, by the way, if it is a Bernie supporter, of course I condemn it. Of course Bernie condemns it. Like he said, he condemns all forms of violence, all forms of threats, everything. But let's also not forget, there was a story that came out recently, Correct the Record, which is a Democratic super PAC for Hillary Clinton. They teamed up with her campaign, which, by the way, is questionable in and of itself in terms of the legality. And they said, we're going to pay $1 million to online trolls to do online trolling. So, hey, let's respond to anybody who criticizes Hillary in any way and shout them down and fucking shame them and tell them they're wrong and tell them they're stupid. They're literally paying online trolls. And would I put it past them for them to be responsible for sending in some of the threats and for trying to portray Bernie Sanders supporters in this negative light? Oh, I wouldn't do that at all, because previously, if you had said, hey, they're paying online trolls without it being official and on the record and in the news, people would say, oh, you're crazy. Hillary Clinton doesn't need to pay an online troll army to make her look good. That's crazy. Why would you say that? No, but we know that's a matter of fact. So is it really that much different to think, well, hey, how do we know it's a Bernie supporter that did a so-called death threat? I mean, guys, Bernie Sanders is literally the most liberal politician in the United States of America. Certainly the most liberal in Washington. Again, internationally, he's just moderate. But in the U.S., yeah, he's a fucking liberal. He's the most anti-war, the most pro-peace. He repeatedly stresses nonviolence. And, oh, yeah, the followers of that guy, man, that's a wild bunch, let me tell you. They're going to be out there in the streets with their fucking AR-15s any day now. How preposterous of an argument. The guy who's most pro-peace and most anti-war, now all of a sudden, his supporters, they say, they have a penchant for violence. Right, they're uniquely prone to violence if they support the most anti-violence candidate. How stupid do you think we are? Guys, they've jumped the shark. The establishment has lost their fucking mind. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to do because Bernie Sanders is actually charging. Bernie Sanders is making a difference. Bernie Sanders has so much support in the Democratic base and the progressive base. Bernie Sanders is bringing the Democratic Party back to what its roots should be. And he's saying, this is how we're going to act. And the establishment can't take it because they're totally and utterly sold out to Wall Street, just like Hillary Clinton is. And now they're pulling out every dirty trick in the book to try to stop him. In fact, now they're just flat out using Republican tricks. Now, by the way, at the end of the day, we're talking about the Nevada convention here. There's really not many delegates at stake, even if, it had gone Bernie's way at this last convention. I think it's literally we're talking about 2 delegates here. So I don't want anybody to think this changes the election. In fact, Hillary won the original caucus in Nevada, and it should have just been left at that, okay? But the point is here, the principle of it. You're willing to see how far they'll go to stop actual progressive thought and liberal leaders from, having a platform and having more influence. When they're willing to get this dirty and get this corrupt and make it so obvious for everybody, you see that it's a blind rage against somebody like Bernie because they probably lost more Bernie Sanders voters for Hillary in the general than they gained in delegates at this convention. So it's the principle of the thing, and they will go so low to the point where they accuse Bernie supporters of being okay with violence and intimidation and threats. None of that is true. We have eyes and ears. We saw who was wrong at the convention. No obfuscating after the fact can change that. We're on to you.